Are you getting persistent misfires, particularly at cold start? Well, then this is the video for you because we're going to go over 6 major causes of this on your late model BMW with an N54 engine. So let's get started. The N54 engine came installed in model years 2007 to 2010 and models 135, 335, and 535i. And you are looking at the 3 most common causes, the trifecta of the most common problems when it comes to misfires on these engines. The coils, they never got this design right. They had a high rate of failure on the original Bosch coils that came installed on these cars. Those coils were also used on all BMW engines of the eras, the ones in the Minis and everything. They all end up failing. You end up having to replace them. Definitely look at your coils as the first cause. If you have a misfire on just one cylinder, swap the coil with any other cylinder. Just swap them. If you have a misfire on number 3, swap it with 4. And then start your engine and see if the misfire moves from 3 to 4. If it moves, that means that the coil is bad. Just go ahead and replace it. Actually, go ahead and replace all of them because it's likely that the rest will fail very soon. Another problem is that the coil might not be pushed down all the way, and there could be some arcing between the tip of the coil and the head of the plug. Check for signs of that when you're pulling your coils out. You'll see some sort of burning. You should check for that. Next problem could be your spark plugs. On this engine, the spark plugs need to be changed every 45,000 miles or much more often if you have a tuned N54. What you want to look out for when you're removing the plugs, this plug was very recently installed and this is the way it should basically look. You want to look at the tip of this injector. You see how it's nice and round. It looks like a piece of round stock that's been just cut off cleanly. When these wear out, this will wear down to a pointed tip. And if you see that, this is very bad. The plug is old and it needs to be replaced. You also want to check to make sure that the plugs are tightened down correctly. If they're not tightened down, they're a little bit loose, that could actually cause misfires as well. That brings us to everyone's favorite topic, fuel injectors. The first thing you'll learn about these is that there are different index numbers. This one happens to be an index 9. That's where the index is right there. They started at 1, they're all the way up to index 12 at this point. Index 12 is the one that you want. Apparently after index 11, so indexes 11 and 12, they finally fixed all the problems with these injectors. At least that's what everyone keeps saying. But then again, if they fixed it with index 11, why did they come out with index 12? You know what I mean? There are many problems with these. One is that the tips actually build up a lot of carbon on them. This is due to BMW's PCV system, which they call crankcase ventilation. And basically that recycles all of your blow-by gases back into the intake manifold. And so there's a lot of carbon that gets built up in the engine and particularly on the head of the fuel injector. Now the tip of this fuel injector, actually it comes out when the fuel injector opens, and that could cause a little bit of the carbon to kind of creep back into the tip, and that could actually make these things leak. If your car sort of sits overnight, the thing can leak very slowly, and the way these are positioned in the car, kind of like this, it could potentially leak onto the plug, so you might actually find that your plugs are wet when these things are leaking. So that's one thing to check for. But the most common symptom when you have a leaky fuel injector is that when you go and you start up the car in the morning during cold start, you're going to have a misfire or some misfires. It might not be severe enough that you're going to feel the engine actually missing. It might just be rough running, and then it clears up as the engine kind of runs and warms up, and you know, the misfire kind of goes away, or the rough running kind of goes away. So that's one particular problem. Another problem is that almost certainly these have been replaced once in the life of your vehicle. There were recalls on many of the early ones. You're not going to see them anymore. And BMW replaced them for free. And it's possible, I don't think that this would have happened if a dealer did this, but perhaps if your fuel injectors were later replaced at an independent repair shop, it's entirely possible that these decouplers were not changed. You see this decoupler ring that's sort of moving right here? This sort of functions as a little bit of a spring. This allows the injector to float within the bore and absorb the vibrations. If it didn't have this, it would just sort of eventually get vibrated out. Basically, it's being held in by this, well, it's being clamped in, but it's also being held in by this Teflon seal right at the rim right here. If there's a leak and combustion gases get out past this seal, it could actually melt down the head right where the injector is stuck into it. So sometimes just changing the decoupler and the Teflon ring on these could actually solve a misfire. These injectors can also become clogged. It just depends on the driving habits of the previous owner. Maybe they didn't drive it that often, and so if the fuel sits inside, it could actually clog the injector up. There are professional services that will clean these injectors for you. What they do is they put the cleaning solution through at the high pressures that these normally operate under. These operate under very, very high pressure, thousands of PSI. So they will flush the coolant through under those high pressures, and then they will put these in an ultrasonic bath, which sort of jostles loose all the gunk that's inside of it, and then they back flush it. They insert the coolant or the cleaning solution at the tip, and then they flush all the dirt out through the inlet. This is actually the best way to do it because sometimes that dirt can't get out of the small passage on the tip. So they back flush it and they clean it that way, and then they test it and make sure it's all within specs again. They rebuild the piezoelectric stack. They do a lot of stuff to clean these injectors out. It's quite involved. One way to actually get some cheap Index 12 injectors is to buy some used ones on eBay and then send them off to have them professionally cleaned at that service, and it could actually come out to less than buying brand new ones, and at least you'll get OEM ones at that point. A lot of people are buying aftermarket ones, but the aftermarket ones don't really work out for very long. So that's one way to go. And if you're interested in that service, I will throw a link down in the description to one that I found. Now, if your problem is any one of these three major things, you don't have to just go right out and replace them. It's always best to figure out if any one of them is bad, particularly if you have a misfire in just one cylinder. You always want to do the swap test like I was talking about earlier. Swap the coil with a neighbor cylinder and then start the car. If the misfire moves, it was the coil. If it wasn't that, do the spark plug. Swap just the spark plug with its neighbor and see if the problem moves. And again, if it's not that, swap the injectors. You're going to have to buy new decouplers and new Teflon O-rings, but it's really not that difficult. You can swap the injectors over, and if the problem moves, there you go. If the problem doesn't move, leave the injectors where they are. It doesn't matter if they're swapped. If the problem moves, then you found it. If not, then it could be something else. And that something else could be compression. There might be something wrong with the bottom end of your car, and what you have to do is hook up a compression tester like this into the cylinder and crank the engine until this thing stops moving up, until the pressure stops building. And what you're looking for on a somewhat high mileage engine is maybe about 170 PSI. That's a good ballpark. If you're down to like 130, something's wrong, okay? And now to figure out what is wrong, you need to do a cylinder leak down test. And for this, you're going to need an air compressor because you need to deliver compressed air into here. And what this does is it monitors the pressure of the air going in and then the pressure of the air going out into the cylinder. And it tells you the difference between those two. So if you have air leaking out of your cylinder, this is going to tell you how much air is leaking, and then you will be able to figure out where the air is going by listening to all the major places that it could leak out of. And those would be the intake valves. So you'll hear the air sort of in the intake manifold or coming in the intake manifold area. If you just kind of put your ear, you'll hear it. If it's leaking out of the exhaust valve, you'll hear it mostly out of the exhaust side of the engine, or you can also go to the back of the car and listen at the tailpipe. It could also be coming from an adjacent cylinder. So what you want to do is remove all of your spark plugs when you do this, and you just want to listen to an adjacent cylinder and see if the air is coming out of there. You can put your finger down in the hole to sort of change the tone. If there's air coming out of there, the tone will change, the sound of the air rushing out will change. So you want to, if you hear air coming from an adjacent cylinder, that means your head gasket is bad. Or you want to take the oil fill cap off and see if the air is coming out of there. If it is, it means that you have a compression ring that's bad. Or you want to take off the radiator cap and you want to see if there's air bubbling up in the radiator, in the coolant reservoir. That would mean that your head gasket's bad and the air is leaking into your cooling system. Guys, if you enjoyed this content, please give me a thumbs up. It really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. And leave me a comment. I do read them on all my latest videos. Remember to subscribe. I'm Jason, the 50s kid. Thanks a lot for watching.